9:36 exactly. Welcome back to the show. And next online, we have Thembisa Ebrahim Fakude to talk to us about the situation in Afghanistan. Thembisa Ebrahim Fakude is the senior researcher at Africa Asia Dialogues. And I don't think anyone globally expected the speedy way in which the Taliban has taken over. Salaam alaikum, Ebrahim. Welcome to the program and nice to have you on air again.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Were you surprised by the turn of events?
Well, yesterday I wasn't surprised, or at least for the past 3 days I wasn't surprised, because the trajectory was indicating that the Taliban was eventually going to take over Kabul, because they just walked over in all of those other cities. With all appearances, it seemed as if the Afghan forces just abandoned posts and allowed Taliban fighters to take over the cities that they've since taken over.
So the Taliban have reassured the citizens of Afghanistan, and very especially in Kabul, that no revenge will be taken upon them. They shouldn't worry about any repercussions that will be meted out to them. But despite those type of reassurances, we've seen pictures of, on social media of absolute chaos at the airports where citizens are trying to get out of the country. We are also told that there are huge bottlenecks at all the border posts, very especially the border post with Pakistan. Why do you think there's such panic amongst the citizens?
I think it's because of the history of the brutality of the Taliban, and leading to what the events of yesterday. The Taliban has also captured the number of governors and some politicians were killed in the past at least 10 days as they were advancing towards Kabul. So there is an element of trust from the populace in Afghanistan that the Taliban, notwithstanding what they've said, they might just execute revenge, even though they've said that they're not going to do that. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. So it's basically the history and the brutality that the Taliban has carried its struggle against the occupiers of Afghanistan and the governments of Afghanistan, not only now but in the past, that has made people not to trust and take their word as the truth, and the anxiety that we've seen is as a result of that history.
Ashraf Ghani is said to have fled the country, and he said it was the right move for him because he wanted to avoid bloodshed. 3 days ago, I was thinking that perhaps there'll be talks of a unity government. That's all out the window now, is it not?
Well, there are talks taking place at the moment of a transitional government or a unity government, and that's what the Taliban have said. But whether that government will include the current members of Ashraf Ghani's government, we'll have to wait and see. But the plan is that there's going to be a government that will include all factions in Afghanistan. That's what the Taliban has said. And one only hope that the current members of Ashraf Ghani's cabinet will also be part of that government.
Also, we know that a country like Afghanistan is ruled by a lot of tribal leaders, and they're not necessarily aligned with the Taliban. There would obviously be accommodation for them as well to be part of this unity government. Or do you think that in time the Taliban's going to be taking over completely?
I don't think the Taliban can succeed in governing Kabul. Kabul is not the same as other cities in Afghanistan. Kabul is a very multicultural, and they've got a lot of groupings with different political affiliations. So the Taliban, if it was to really rule Afghanistan, it has to consolidate its power in Kabul, and the utilization of a battle of a gun is unlikely to succeed in Kabul, because you have a very polarized political system in Kabul, which will require some sort of national cohesion, some sort of consensus in terms of moving forward. So it was easy for the Taliban. I think the easy part was to fight and advance to Kabul, but now it's the moment of truth for the Taliban, because they will have to, number one, unite all of those factions in Afghanistan. But importantly, they will have to start delivering to the people of Afghanistan, including providing security, making sure that there's stability, there's employment, the economy functions, and that requires some sort of normal politics, which is something I think they are now realizing, that the fighting was the easiest part, but gaining confidence internationally, gaining confidence within all the factions in Afghanistan, that's going to be a much, much more difficult part. And we'll have to see how they go about achieving that.
There's also suggestions that within the Taliban themselves, that there are certain factions who are staunch ISIS followers or ISIS members, and they are operating under the guise of Taliban. Do you think there's any truth in that? And the same can be said about Al-Qaeda. People are afraid, the civilians are afraid, notwithstanding the Western countries that are very, very nervous, and Afghanistan's neighbors, with this turn of events.
Yeah, there are those. I mean, we need to remember the history of the Taliban, why they were kicked out in the first place in 2001. They were kicked out because they were hosting and harboring Osama bin Laden.
Right.
And that's why they were kicked out from power. So Osama bin Laden is known as the leader of Al-Qaeda. The culture of Afghanistan and the Pashtun people in general, and Muslims, is the culture of taking care and protection of the wayfarer. The Taliban at the time refused to give up Osama bin Laden, notwithstanding the chaos that ensued as a result, because of that principle, the principle of you need to take care of those that are traveling and those who seek protection from you. And that's what they did. Now, to answer your question, there are a lot of people who went to Afghanistan to join the Mujahideen over the years, who went to Afghanistan because they were running away from all sorts of persecution from our own countries. It's unlikely now that the Taliban will change that stance and start giving over those kind of people. So they will be existing side by side with the Taliban. But whether they'll be able to execute their missions in Afghanistan, given the new role that the Taliban will be taking, the new role that Taliban will be assuming, I don't think they will be able to do that, because the Taliban at the end of the day will have to now lead, will have to ensure political and stability, will have to ensure that the economy works, etc. So they will actually be playing the role of a government. And those that think, those factions that hope they will begin to launch their campaigns from Afghanistan because the Taliban is in power, I'm not quite sure whether that is going to be seen through.
I guess it's a wait and see situation. There are other concerns as well. We have the situation of ethnic minorities, the Shiites. I think they are the Hazara Shia group, who are in a minority, and other minorities as well. The Taliban has reassured them that they won't be persecuted in any way or form, that they do have a place and a space in Afghanistan. Do you think that they'd stick with their promises going forward?
Well, yes, I think so. But the point that I would like to mention before we finish our discussion is that the Taliban are Muslims. They might have the Deoband affiliation, but these are Muslims and they are guided by Islamic principles. And there is a campaign to portray them as people that are unruly, people that are cruel, who chops people's heads and beat women in public, etc. But at the end of the day, they are also Muslims. And since this is a Muslim channel, we need to remember that they are also guided by the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They're not just criminals, and they've been fighting a just war for the past 20 years. So I'm of the view, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, given that the Muslims and they follow same kind of scriptures that I do, and all of them hope to somehow be upset at the day of Qiyamah. I would like to believe that they will not be cruel, no, go against the violation of basic human rights and continue with the accusations that are widespread and have all become to know. I mean, have all become to associate to the Taliban. So I think it will be a different type of a leadership, and if they're given a chance, I'm of the view that they might just make it with the support of countries like Qatar, for example, that continues to host the talks, which are meant to bring peace and stability in Afghanistan. So I'm hopeful. I think they understand the challenge and the pressure that they are under at the moment, given all the things that we've heard about them over the years, that they have to rule and make sure that Afghanistan is a peaceful place and is prosperous for all the people who live in it.
Inshallah. Finally, we also hear that they have designated specific or special areas, protected areas for women, and they've urged the women, obviously we're talking about displaced women and children and families, to go to those areas. I presume that is for the protection of the women, and they're also trying to portray the fact that they're being very humanitarian. They're being exactly what we're hoping that they're going to be, Muslim in every sense of the word, protecting women and children and their rights.
Yes, but I also think right now they are put under pressure to issue certain position statements that other governments around the world are actually given time to consider before uttering them in public. And perhaps in the next couple of hours, they will realize that, the spokesperson doesn't have to necessarily go all the way out in articulating certain positions, because there will be contradictions. My hope is that moving forward, they will be guarded in what they say, because there are going to be pressures coming from different parts of the world, particularly from their supporters, who will like to see a semblance of peace and progressiveness in Afghanistan. But what we see at the moment, unfortunately, is that they are pushed into a corner where they are just pressured to say, what the West expects. And I think that's problematic, and it's not fair for the young leadership that is about to assume power in Afghanistan.
Okay, we're going to watch the space very closely and probably talk to you more often in the coming days, inshallah. Senior Researcher at Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Ebrahim Fakude. Assalamu alaikum and jazakallah for your time.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
9:48 exactly. We're going for an ad break. But before we do, let me just tell you that all eyes globally has been on the events unfolding in Afghanistan. But also lots of other things are happening all around the world. I mentioned the forest fires. I mentioned the floods. What also has been happening in Palestine as we speak, in the occupied West Bank, violence has broken out, and it has been reported that 3 people have been killed. Also, the other devastating news is the terrible earthquake in Haiti. It measured, I think, 7.2 on the Richter scale, and there are hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of fatalities, and the numbers are growing rapidly as we speak, and there's mass destruction in Haiti due to the earthquake. So lots of things happening globally, but the big story, or one of the biggest stories, is the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan.
Looking to get your kick? Keep